Hi everyone, Martin here. Welcome to the Inner Loop. In this video, we're going to do something completely different. It's not a coding project, it's a woodworking project. Let's have a little look at the inspiration for this project, where it all came from.
So Mark Dana of Dana Made website made a video inviting people to a pallet challenge. Simple premise was to find yourself a pallet or multiple pallets and to make something. If you watch his channel, you'll see he tends to make large blocks of pallet and make furniture. He got all of his friends on board to help him with his video. It's actually hilarious. And his premise was that there was a meme about making a coffee table, making a pallet out of an old coffee table. I'll put a link to his video in the description below. Even Jesper there helped him to narrate the video. Glibly, I replied to this challenge of his, saying, well, it was fun, I enjoyed watching it. I wonder if there's some kind of poetry. Is there some kind of way of making a pallet out of a pallet in a way that's kind of artistically relevant and poetic? I didn't think anything more about it, really. I left that to him to go away and think about, can you make a pallet from a pallet? Can you make something that, maybe you'd use in the kitchen, like a trug or something? Can you make something that has the same function as a pallet out of a pallet? Didn't really think anything more about it and hurried on my way. But then, as I was walking around town, I was thinking, I wonder if I could get involved in this. I don't actually have much in the way of woodworking tools, but I have made stuff out of pallets in the past. I made a toolbox. And maybe, I've certainly taken one apart. I understand the process and the quality of the wood that you get. So I had an idea that I could actually maybe do something, and that might lead on to a separate inner loop type project. And just to use this challenge as a bit of a starting point, a kind of kick-off place. As I was walking around town, I saw loads and loads of pallets lying around. Eventually I saw this one in an alleyway. It was raining, and I popped into the shop where it appeared to belong and said, can I have it? And they said yes. And at that point, I think I was committed to this pallet wood challenge, and it's time for me to make an entry. I picked this pallet up, shoved it in the back of the car, and took it home. And here it is in its glory. I don't know what type it is. You can see it's got, 5 slats. So making stuff out of wood is, I guess, kind of visceral. It's something that human beings have been doing. It's the first material that has ever been available to human beings. And making stuff out of wood, it's always going to be deeply satisfying on a visceral level. As is, of course, doing mathematics and creating a detailed plan. And here was mine. Well, here's some of my tools for my project. What I wanted to do was to cut a thinnest strip off this pallet. So rather than dismantling it, since I don't have a workbench, I thought it would actually make a workbench by itself. And I could use its rigidity to help me actually cut it. Right, always vitally important, check square. You can see here I've drilled a little hole in the pallet, and so I can get the jigsaw in. So what I did here is I got my 2 clamps and my square, and I set myself up a fence for the jigsaw so that I could run along and cut myself a strip of wood. And here was my first pass. You can see I cut a little cut into the pallet at the other end, and it made a reasonably good cut actually, but it took a long time and made a huge amount of noise. And there's the first strip. So the very first little strip of wood I managed to cut off the pallet. You can see here now I've cut off a second strip, but it was really wonky. The next strip I cut was just a complete disaster. So I got out the old Surform and I cleaned up the edge of the pallet and cleaned up the edge of the strip, and there's the next strip I managed to cut off. But going backwards and forwards with this jigsaw just took forever and was really noisy. So, impatient person that I am, decided, well, why don't I just cut it with a normal handsaw? And you can see that didn't go all that well because I went completely off the line. Then I discovered that all I actually needed to do was to lay the handsaw against the piece of wood, score it along with a screwdriver a few times, make a sort of mark, and then just rip along. And before I knew what happened, I'd actually was now starting to make some little strips of wood with my mitre square thing here and a hacksaw. I could cut into little blocks. Now we're inside. I've got these tiny little panel pins, I think they're called, but they're a little bit too long for my project, so I just took the hacksaw to them. And I don't own a vise, so just, pair of mole grips, hacksaw. Now you can see I'm starting to get some materials together. I've got these long strips of wood. I've got my hacksaw in the house, I've got my mitre block and tape measure. Those tape measures that come out on a spring, you can never find them. I've got one somewhere, I've completely lost it. And if you've got a child under the age of, say, 12, you'll find it, but the spring will be broken anyway. So, yeah, I just stole the tape measure from my wife's sewing box. And here you can see the first kind of beginnings of my my project. I'm actually making a pallet out of the pallets. I was wondering how to actually fit all these things together, because the little nails will be fine, but how to hold it all together to start with. And I hummed and hawed, and I didn't really want to glue it up. I didn't want to use glue because that's not how pallets are made. But in the end, it just occurred to me the simplest and easiest way to make this happen would be to actually to glue it all together, which is what I did. And with tons and tons of gluing force here, I managed to glue the pallet together. Well, the first half anyway. You can see there that my sawing wasn't fantastic, but then pallets aren't fantastic. Then here's the second part of the glue up. So I glued it in two parts because I just couldn't hold all the pieces together in one go. And here's the final thing. Now I was struggling to decide, should I put the nails in it or should I leave it like that? And I decided that to be authentic, it would actually need to have the nails. You'll see those little blocks that I made. The nails are going to go straight into the grain, and if you do that, it's probably just going to split. So what I decided to do was to drill a hole and then essentially just push these little tiny nails that I made in. So they're more cosmetic than actually mechanical. And here's the final thing. A bit rough and ready, a bit battered looking. But of course, I cut actually enough material to make two. So here's number 2. And here's me cutting even more pins for number 2. And here they are, final 2. 2 little pallets made from a pallet. I'm not an expert at Photoshop. In fact, I haven't even got it. But I did think that it would be important to make this photograph. The next step, obviously, is to make something to go on the pallet. This being the inner loop, there really is only one thing I could have made to go on this pallet. And there it is. And it's now ready to meet with its family and ready for the next project, which is where I was actually going to start before Mark distracted me with the pallet build. So keep an eye out for my next video, where hopefully we're going to turn this into something.
Thank you for watching if you made it this far. That was my story of making a pallet out of a pallet with just a few tools. I just want to say thank you finally to Mark and to all of you makers out there who do this sort of thing day in, day out, and create just amazing video content for us to enjoy. I want to thank Mark for his challenge, because it certainly helped me engage with my creativity for a while and gave me some sleepless nights thinking about how to achieve this. I've been Martin, this is the Inner Loop, and I'll see you on the next video, where hopefully we can make something out of that robot.
I just wanted to record a little epilogue, because every woodworking shop has got a scraps bin, right? And I had quite a few scraps left over at the end of this project. I couldn't really let them go. So I just had to make one more mini pallet. And the other thing I had was lots of sawdust. And I had a plasticine model and I had a sandpaper. So my plasticine model became a mould and the sandpaper became a grip tape and the leftover sawdust and a bit of wood glue became a skateboard deck. So I guess these projects never really come to an end.
Just a few final thoughts. This pallet I made by hand cutting wood. You experienced woodworkers with table saws and all the rest of it could whip these out in no time at all. It did occur to me though that you could make one of these simply by carving out a slat, pallet slat. So in the slat you could just take your router and route that shape out, and then when it's finished cut it out. So you could actually could even just on a pillar drill just drill that through, drill these bits through, and then chisel it out and actually make a pallet out of a slat. So it's just hit me in the comments below if you could think of any way, pillar drill, router, any other kind of different ways of making a pallet out of a pallet. That's it. Thank you very much. See you next time.